So you hate your job and you want to quiet quit into a franchise. First off, let's talk about how to do that, where you should go about it. But start off, what even is quiet quitting realistically?
Yeah, so I would define quiet quitting as maintaining your current job, starting a business, and doing enough to where you don't get fired, but also enough to where you're building the actual business that's going to lead you out of your career and into a new one.
Yeah, I would say a lot of people's situation, if you're a classic person that has obligations, it just may not be feasible for you to take the full leap, between mortgage and, children, whatever the case may be. This is an opportunity to still fulfill your job's obligations, but transition out of that job into something that you own as opposed to, maybe another job.
Yeah, because I think one of the main issues as we work with clients that we see is a lot of people have the desire to step into entrepreneurship and they want to own their own business, but it's that transition period, right? You need, in general with business, you need to have some semblance of a startup phase where you don't have the cash flow to be able to support your personal life. And that can be very daunting, especially if you have dependents, like a wife, a husband, or children that kind of needs you to bring in some money. So this offers you the ability to maintain that stable base while also building that ideal future.
Yeah, and franchising can be a really good way to do that. Now, to clarify, it doesn't work for every single option. There's a lot of franchise opportunities out there, I think north of 4,000 maybe. And I don't want to say most, but a lot aren't necessarily suited for this particular option. A lot you do need to be able to take that dive kind of head first right away.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's really important not to go into your franchise exploration thinking or assuming that you can do this with anything that you see. So whether you're working with a consultant or doing it on your own, you find a really good brand, you can't just assume you can do this.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and I think you do want to consider investment too. You don't want to be, the bigger the investment, the more likely you need to be more involved. So not that you can't do this with an investment that's massive, relatively, that's north of $500,000, but I would just suggest not to do it. You probably want to make sure you're, if you're going to not go full time, you have the appropriate service and you've thought about it financially as well too.
Yep. Yeah. Completely agreed.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay. So, what are some franchises where this could actually work?
Yeah. So one that comes to mind right away is a brand called the Clothesbin, which is a brand I love to show clients who are in this type of position. And I would say the primary reason is the responsibility of the owner in terms of a time investment is really only 1 day a week, and it's kind of like a half day. So the way I describe it to individuals is if you're kicking your feet up on Saturday morning and you have 4 hours to map out a route to be able to send to a driver, that's all you need to do to have this business run.
Yeah, which is awesome. And so give a little bit more on like what it does, right? It requires it's built for 1 day a week, which is awesome. So this is something to consider with any quiet quitting into franchise ownership. This particular model can work for anyone with 1 day availability a week. Now, most people usually can do that, so maybe it's Saturday. And what exactly is the service of Clothesbin? I mean, within the name, it gives us an idea, but
yeah. So I'm sure if you're driving around, you've seen these clothing donation bins that they're usually in a gas station parking lot or a supermarket parking lot. And you maybe have used one where you've taken a bag of clothes, you throw it in, and then you have no idea what happens after it.
Yeah.
That's where the Clothesbin's business model really kicks off. So as an owner, you are in the business of collecting clothes that people don't want anymore, and then you're leveraging corporates' resale network to be able to bulk give them a truck full of clothes that the resale facility is going to do all of the sorting and deciding on what's resellable, what needs to be, broken down and converted into insulation or whatever other recyclable nature the material goes to. But the business model at its core is a collection service that then you are selling to a reseller in bulk.
Yeah, right. And this model, because it's just physical bins that when they're full is when you actually have to service them. There's no time sensitive demands on the owner. So you're never going to get a call at Friday at noon that, hey, someone called out. That's not really the case. You're the one planning to actually go pick those things up and then go deliver them. And now to quite transition out, which a lot of people want to go from, hey, I'm running this and then potentially actually full-time quitting, right? Running this, there is scalability with the closed bin model, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The one nice thing I love about closed bin is they're really big on selling you a large territory that you grow into. So compare this to like a service-based business, right? Just say you're in painting. When you purchase your territory, right from the bat, you're going to be servicing the entirety of the service area because you want to get as much revenue as possible. With this model, a single given territory might be able to hold 60 or 70 bins, but you only start with around 20 to 25. So they want you to start at that number so you get used to the flow of having a route and building it out for your driver. But ultimately, once you are comfortable and you have some cash flow, you buy more bins and you put them in more locations and so on and so forth.
Without expanding territory too.
Exactly.
And then as you grow with the bins, it's more days for your driver. So you may even need multiple part-time drivers. So that's where you may need not to be full-time, but your demands become more so to go in. But you can definitely start, even if you work a job like a nurse or a doctor where you have to physically go and you can't necessarily take calls. This is an operation where you can start, see that cash flow come in, and then once you have that established, you can reinvest and maybe go full-time.
Yep, absolutely. That's an important part, that for this specific brand, it's really appropriate for virtually anybody, regardless of what your job is, because quiet quitting looks a lot different for someone who has to go to their job, whether you're a doctor, a pilot, if you
plumber,
anything that you have to actually leave your home and go do something. This is an appropriate quiet quitting model. Now, to transition into another brand that has quiet quitting ability in a service like Duty Calls. So Duty Calls is a service-based business that has technicians and trucks that go out to people's homes and do pet waste remediation, which
poop
is
and scooping.
Yes, that is the nice way to say professional poop scoopers.
Yeah.
For a brand like this, the quiet quitting application is more geared for somebody who works from home, because you need to be able to answer the phone. If a technician's having an issue on a job, or whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. If something happens, they need to be able to call you, and you need to be able to answer that to be able to fix the problem. So if you are a doctor or a pilot, you don't have the option to just pick up your phone whenever they call. But if you work from home at a desk job where you have tasks to do, but ultimately if you get a phone call, you can answer it no problem, this business model is much more appropriate for that type of individual.
Yeah, this model you can't just do one day a week. It's not going to work. I mean, technically maybe you could pay a manager and have them do it, but especially if this is your first business, just the math is probably not going to make sense. You're going to need to have that bandwidth. Now, I don't necessarily think you're going to need to be putting 50, 60 hours a week in, so you can keep your job if done appropriately with corporate's help. But to your point, you got to have that flexibility to, can you pop out and do a job? Can you go help change a tire? I mean, can you call AAA? I mean, these are things that come up in a service business when you're talking about, people that are running late, that don't show up, that that they grabbed the wrong credit card, and now they can't get gas in the truck. All these things that can come up throughout the day and week, you have to be able to take that call. So that's a good one where you can do it if you have more than you need flexibility throughout the day, probably 5 to 6 days a week, for sure, to do it. But what I will say with this model is it really is scalable too, because as you get multiple trucks on the road and you get recurring business with the Duty Calls, especially the commercial application, which they have residential and commercial application, it can be a very stable way to fully quit, to go from quiet quitting to outwardly quitting and actually leave your job full time, because you if you have a year or 6 months or whatever the case may be of history of knowing, hey, here's what our monthlies look like, it can be a pretty easy way to transition. And then there's a real high top end too on that particular model.
Yeah, and with duty calls specifically, and you touched on it earlier, Dill, but it's a relatively low investment. 60 to 89,000, I think, is the investment range. So as you're somebody who's going to keep a job and can't drive as much business, the first few weeks or months that you're open, not having that large of an investment is really palatable for your average individual versus $500,000 that you might have taken a loan out for. You're paying interest. You got a lot of overhead. This is a lean and mean service that is really doable for pretty much your everyday person.
Yeah, and no real equipment besides trucks, pickup trucks, which of course you can lease or purchase and have considerable resale value. I don't think you're going to be profiting on those assets, but they hold enough value over time that you shouldn't have to deal with what you might if things go sideways on a long-term lease of a commercial property, right? If you take a 10-year lease and do leasehold improvements, you're talking real big obligations long-term that, I wouldn't suggest quiet quitting with that much investment and that long-term of a commitment, where with the duty calls, you definitely can if you have the flexibility.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So that's two. And then a third quiet quitting industry are franchises that have a consultative nature to them.
Coaching aspect.
Yep.
Yeah. One we like, Schooley Mitchell, which provides services for businesses, mostly small businesses, things like, even just bookkeeping, saving tips for cost reduction, where they take a portion of it. And Schooley Mitchell actually trains you on, not only how to identify and find those locations. This one is one of the more intensive of the quiet quitting. You definitely need to have a flexible work from home job because you're the one driving the business. Like you're the one actually going out and doing the development with Schooley Mitchell as an example to meet with those owners. So this isn't an option for somebody who's got a really big intensive job, but especially if you have the expertise, it can be a great way to really see immediate cash flow, because if you can build those clients and you have those expertise, you can do it without necessarily needing to have almost any equipment, right? You don't need any equipment, no long-term lease, and can be a really great way to add, especially if you're already in a similar space. Schooley Mitchell's a really good one as an example to look at. And there's multiple in that kind of coaching space. That some are business coaching. There's a couple senior consulting services you can do. Logistics. Yeah, we have a couple of state brands where you can do that. So, if, depending on kind of your background and, if you come from the healthcare space, you may want to look senior. If you're more business minded, you may want to look more at a Schooley Mitchell. But those are good ones too. They're more like a side job with the franchise's help that you can turn into a business. That's kind of the way we think about those. So that one, you definitely need a good amount of time. I wouldn't try doing that, 20, 30 hours a week. I think you're going to want to invest, or if you do, you're going to see a long time before you see any return. But, it's another good option depending on your skill set.
Yeah.
That's a good way to kind of transition out of that job, right?
Yeah. So with this, coaching or consulting type business, it's really important to evaluate what your typical days look like, because if your job, even if you do work from home, if your job requires you to do tasks that really take 5-6 hours a day to do, you're either going to have to clock a lot more hours, or you're going to have to sacrifice what you're doing at your actual job, which,
that defeats the purpose.
Exactly.
Almost. Yeah, now you're just going full time if you lose the job.
Exactly. Now here's another angle. If you're if you have a job where, just say you're on for 2 weeks and then off for 2 weeks. And I know like flight attendants, like that's big. You work 3 weeks straight and then you have 3 weeks straight off.
Yeah.
Well, that might be perfect because yes, you can't do the consulting services when you're on a plane, but if you have 3 weeks to really dedicate, you're adding that in seamlessly to your schedule. So this is the coaching and these logistics types franchises, they're really good to be able to work when you can. And if your job allows for that, when you have an extended period of time off, it might be a great way to supplement the income without having to take a second job.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to approach it. Yeah, kind of work as much as you can, and then if you as you develop that business and the the referral base and the kind of ongoing clients, you may be able to maybe take more time off from that job and start not picking up as many shifts, that allows you to do it. This model too, you want to be careful if you're in a job that fluctuates, where you may have a week where you're not that busy and the next week you're super busy. You don't want to be setting up client meetings that then you're canceling, especially if you're going to invest in a model like this. But yeah, those are 3 common ways we recommend clients to look at quiet quitting. And I think it's good here to pause for a second too and talk about just not that it's impossible, but you want to be really careful about the other models where you're going to try quiet quitting, meaning like food, big brick and mortar models, because I think commonly people assume that they can do it because they know other people are doing it. But I think if this is your first rodeo, you want to make sure you start small and realistic. And I don't mean this to crush anybody's dreams, but if you've never run a business before, I don't think it's a good idea, even if it financially makes sense and you can't afford it, to start with 3 really big food franchise locations just because, well, the math tells me I can do it, because you just don't have the experience that if things fall apart, that you could jump in. Even if you can support it financially, I think you want to start small with something like this if this is your first rodeo, don't you think?
100%. And on top of that, maybe you can do it, but what does your life look like at that point? Like you're blowing up everything, whether it's a kid's birthday party, anniversary, just having time to sit and breathe. Even if you can pull it off, that doesn't necessarily... You don't necessarily want to do that.
Right.
So that's the other side of things. Financially, it can make sense. Maybe not the smartest, a little too risky, but also, even if you could pull it off, like, that's going to suck to actually have to deal with. Yeah, it could.
Yeah, and I mean, just as an example, we had Ben on the podcast who owns a Crumble, and he did this, and he is has been successful as a good salesperson. He said there was a lot of flux time. He ran it, semi-absentee is the word. He had a job, and him and his wife ran the location. That's a high-performing franchise, but it did take more of his time than maybe he would have hoped early on. Now he's been successful, but to your point, it doesn't mean that you can't be successful with the other strategies. It just, to your point, understand what it probably means to be successful, and you just make sure you're willing to do that if you want to go some of those higher investment businesses that you may just have to jump into the weeds, and that could mean 100-hour weeks between your job and you leave there right after work, or you take 3 days off and you're going. So these are 3 good options if you want to quiet quit without really risking the quality of your career, and then go full time.
Absolutely. So as always, if you are looking for some guidance in your franchise search, feel free to reach out. When we work with clients, we go over all aspects of business ownership. We make sure that you understand what ownership is going to look like, because ultimately that is as important as what the financial figures look like. So happy to help if you need. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and we'll answer any question you have. And you can, if you just want advice, we'll give it to you. We'll do our best to help you out. Until next time.
Talk to you later.
Thanks.